So that's the first thing that you can apply to AI, is to say, yes, this technology is super powerful, but for you to get value, it has to address the bottleneck, the real bottleneck. And the simple way to test it is use it to improve the bottleneck. If it doesn't improve, it means it wasn't the bottleneck. So the insight of theory of constraints, which I hope will help people apply this concept to their environment, because in many businesses, they're not lucky enough to have just a single bottleneck. There's multiple things that they don't have enough of. And when you're dealing with such a system as a chaotic system, it will underperform and it will be very unreliable. You can't predict it will come out. That's the problem.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Dr. Alan Barnard. Dr. Allen is a decision scientist and widely considered to be one of the world's leading experts in theory of constraints and AI-powered digital twins. Allen is the CEO of Goldratt Research Labs, which he co-founded in 2008 with Dr. Ilya Goldratt, the creator of the theory of constraints. Dr. Allen is the author of 8 books and over 30 white papers on theory of constraints, decision-making, anti-fragility, digital twins, and systems thinking. He's been a consultant and trusted advisor to numerous CEOs and world-class brands. And he's a returning guest to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got involved in this theory of constraint stuff and where you're at right now.
Keith, well, I grew up in South Africa, and we grew up in a small farming community. We're pretty poor, but my grandfather encouraged me to study successful people. And what I noticed was that there are some things that govern our success that are out of our control, like good genes, being a little bit more attractive, a little bit more intelligent, taller maybe, does help. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it does help. It makes life a little bit easier. And also good luck. That plays a big role. But there are 2 main things that are in our control. The one is our willingness to work hard. It doesn't matter what field you want to go into, unless you are willing to work hard and almost become obsessed with it, you have a very small chance of becoming really successful. The second thing is the ability to make good decisions, and especially avoiding really bad decisions. So that became my passion. I wanted to go and study why good people make and often repeat bad decisions, and to develop methods and apps to help them make better, faster decisions when it really, really matters. And the link with theory of constraints happened. I studied industrial engineering. I read this book called The Goal that was written by Dr. Ilya Goldratt, that became my mentor and later on my co-founder of my research lab, Goldratt Research Labs. And I realized that there was this very, very strong connection between decision-making and theory of constraints. Theory of constraints really provides you with a mental model to look at any type of complex system. And your biggest decision that you have to make is not just setting the goal for your system, what's the impact that you want or the income that you want more and more and more of, but looking at that complex system is, how do I differentiate between all the many, many parts and interdependencies that I can measure and improve and manage, which is called the trivial many. How do I differentiate that from the vital few, the few that I absolutely should analyze, manage, and improve, and then to the one, critical one that I should do first? So the idea of a chain, if I want this chain to carry 100 pounds, same like I want to start an organization that will feed, 100 people or 100 million people, depending on how ambitious I am. Or I want to start a business that will generate 100,000 in income or maybe 100 million in income, right? Once I'm clear on that goal, I can look at the system as a chain. And basically, I just do a simple classification. Which of the links in this chain are strong enough to get me to the 100? Those are the many links that I shouldn't worry about. Then there are a few that's not strong enough. Those are the weak links. And then there's always going to be the weakest link, the one that I should focus on first. So that's kind of the link between decision making and decision science that I studied and theory of constraints. Theory of constraints is a model to help us set goals and identify what's the limiting factors that we really should be focusing on, which is a decision.
There's a couple of things to unpack in there. It sounds like a prioritization method, a way to choose what to focus on first. I like what you said about the trivial many, but the critical chain is a good way to describe that. So for somebody who might not understand exactly what theory of constraints is, or maybe hasn't read the book, how might people relate to this if they haven't read the goal?
Yeah, so if you think about you have an organization, right? And that organization, you have decided on a goal to make 100, right? It could be impact or income. And now you're trying to find out, well, how much is this thing really capable of? So you have to decide, what work you're going to have to do. Once you've decided the work, am I going to make a product or provide a service? You'll have to design the process to produce enough of that work to meet the goal. And you have to figure out what's the rules that I use to manage the system. So if you want to know what you are truly capable of, you have to evaluate each part about help me achieve that goal of 100. And that's where this idea is. It doesn't matter how complex your company is that you've got, right? Whether it's got 3 links or 30,000 links, there's always just one weakest link. And that's the brilliance of the theory of constraints, is to say, for many years, we were kind of stuck for actually hundreds of years. If you wanted to analyze and improve and manage a complex system, we thought that the only way to do that is to break it up into parts and analyze and manage and improve each part. And you hope that by doing that, the system will improve. Unfortunately, what often happens is called local optimization, or you're improving a part at the expense of the system. So everybody knew that we should follow a holistic or systems approach, whether you are in managing organization or healthcare or academia, everybody knew you should follow a systems approach. The only problem was nobody gave us a practical way of doing it. And then Goldratt came along. He wrote this beautiful book called The Goal. It's a business novel where he shares these ideas through a story. But the essence of it was he made this profound discovery, kind of like a hack, where he realized if I can look at any system as a chain, right, or network of chains, I can analyze and improve and manage the whole system just by analyzing, improving, and managing the weakest link of the system. Until the weakest link moves, then I have to go and analyze, improve, and manage that. But that sets me on this path of ongoing improvement. So analyzing, improving, and managing any complex system, one constraint or one weakest link at a time. That's kind of the best way to do that. And you can apply that to anything. Currently, my focus is on healthcare, right? Thinking about how do you apply theory of constraints to the human body. And you can say, well, what's our constraint? What's the thing that we don't have enough of, right? And ultimately, it's almost like a business. It's energy.
Interesting.
Right? If you think about a business, what will happen if you have a cash flow constraint? You don't have enough cash to invest in marketing and selling, in R&D, in production and procurement. So when somebody looks at your business and they're trying to find the weakest link, it looks like it's everywhere, right? We don't have enough of everything. But actually deeper down, it's a cash flow constraint. So the same is true for us in our human body. And what I found fascinating is a good analogy is I want the listener or the viewers to think about the first time they bought their new iPhone. Right? You get it out of the packaging and it's so fast, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because the demand that's on that iPhone, if you think about it cumulatively, and the supply, capacity or energy is perfectly balanced, right? The horizontal gap here is just the time it takes you to respond to a demand. High demand, and the vertical gap is the amount of energy that you need to have in the system. Now imagine 2-3 years later, you've now added a lot more apps onto this phone, right? So the demand has gone like this, and your battery has deteriorated. It's gone like this. It's like the perfect storm. And as a result, the iPhone constantly have to make trade-offs. I've got only a little bit of energy. Where should I allocate it? Which apps am I have to close down? And it turns out our body is having to do this balancing act all the time. The point at which demand and supply of energy is no longer in balance, it turns out we have a name for it. Do you know what it's called?
What's that?
Aging.
Aging.
Right, exactly like a smartphone. So what's fascinating is the same insights that we've gained, over the last few decades applying theory of constraints to organizations, supply chains. We can directly apply those to the body. That said, look, you can go in today and you can have almost anything measured, right? Those are the many things that you can do.
Yeah.
And there are so many treatments. You see an infomercial, a new GLP-1 or peptide that have just been. How the hell do you differentiate? But all the many, many things you can measure and treat versus the vital few and the critical one is imagine you realize that your ultimate constraint is energy. When you're gonna, if you sadly have the misfortune of passing away from a heart attack, only 20% of heart attacks are actually due to a genetic condition. 80% of it is due to a constant and chronic undersupply of energy to the heart through the mitochondria.
Really?
Right? And that's a profound insight because now it says, well, what's the most critical thing I should measure in my body? Yes, I should measure my genetic risks, right? But that's a once-off test. I go and get a genetic or epigenetic profile done. But what I should constantly measure is my energy balance, demand versus supply. One thing to measure, right? And if I don't have an accurate way of measuring it, Goldratt used to give me this quote. He used to literally bang it into my head, right? He said, Alan, it's better to be approximately right than precisely wrong.
And that's a great one.
And that's so profound because in the old days, we used to think unless I can measure something precisely, it's not science. And we still make that mistake in business, right? People report things to 2 decimal places, which is nonsense. There's no way that you can measure anything in a business to that accuracy, first of all, right? But it creates this false impression, oh, it must be right if it's so accurate.
Yeah.
Compared to, if I asked you, without you looking at your bank accounts and I say, how's cash? Do you have enough cash?
I could tell you approximately. Yeah.
No or yes. Right?
Yeah.
And then I say, is it getting better or worse? Well, it's getting kind of worse. The same thing is true. It turns out it's a massive simplification, knowing, first of all, the goal, which is for us to have a health span of 100+ years, not just a lifespan, but a health span. But just to say, what should I measure? I should measure how's your energy? And how does it compare to yesterday? Because if we know that energy is the constraint, then we can apply the same hierarchy of changes than what we figured out in business. The first thing is, how do I not waste it? Right? It's the first thing that we do if you have a cash constraint. It's like, how do I not waste it? What can we not buy? Right?
Yeah.
The second thing that you want to do is, how do I create the optimum conditions for the thing that's generating the cash or the energy, which in the body case is mitochondria? How do I feed it with the right inputs, right? Not processed foods and sugars, but whole foods, right? Because then it produces ketones, which is the most efficient form of energy that our body really wants, as ATP, right?
Interesting.
Once I've stopped wasting it, I am absolutely making sure I'm producing at optimum levels. The third thing is, how do I make sure I'm sending it to the right place? And it turns out the mitochondria doesn't just produce energy, it senses where to send it. And if it becomes dysfunctional because you're feeding it with bloody processed foods and sugars, it loses the ability to sense where the energy is really needed. So it's almost like having inventory, right? It sends inventory where there's already too much, and it doesn't send inventory where there's not enough. So that's the third element, is how do I rebuild the sensing ability? And then if it's still not enough, number 4 is, how do I reduce the unnecessary demand? What can I delay? kind of like cash. Is there anything that I have to buy, but I don't have to buy it right now? So imagine your smartwatch telling you, Keith, you shouldn't be doing that important call with your client. Your energy levels are really low and you need to be sharp, right?
Yeah.
Or don't go on that long bicycle ride right now because your energy levels are too low, and I don't trust the mitochondria to allocate enough to your heart. You might, even though you are fit, you might have a heart attack. That's literally what happens with people that get heart attacks out of the blue. Not a genetic
Yeah.
condition, it's just a instant short supply. And then
That's
if
so
it's still
interesting.
not enough, then you can go and borrow money externally, right? Go and get some cash outside. In our case, for health, it's have a ketone drink, take some NCP oil, have creatine, all of these type of things that are external energy supplies, but you shouldn't be on them for a long time. They just really, oh my gosh, today I've got an energy shortage. I need some external help to get away. And that to me is the beauty. So I hope that resonates with you and with the listeners, is how these same insights that we've applied and have been applying for the last 40 years in business can be applied to any complex system, including our bodies, which is one of the most complex systems in the universe.
I love that you've tied these two things together because I ride bikes a lot. We've been for a bike ride together. I find that super interesting. I remember sometime in the last couple of years researching one of the great cyclists, Tadej Pogačar, and his coach said he was talking about this mitochondria, and he was talking about how important this low level exercise is for the mitochondria health, so that when the high demands are placed on it, it's like tested and warmed up and ready to go. And it almost, as you were talking about theory of constraints, and it almost feels like flow, right? The system has a
Yeah.
certain amount of flow in it, a certain amount of anti-fragility, so that when it needs to be stressed, it can be stressed at a really high level. So it's kind of
And that
interesting.
is a key condition for anti-fragility, right?
Mm.
It's you've created a mechanism where it can dampen the impact of a negative stress and actually capitalize on it. And that's what happens when we do exercise. You're actually straining the muscle,
Yeah.
and it's busy preparing it. It's almost like being vaccinated, right? It's a little bit of stress, a negative stress, not too much, so it harms the system, but enough to stress that muscle or that organ to be ready, to get ready. So you're absolutely right. That's a key part of exercising, is to stress the body enough that when that big day comes, you're absolutely ready to go.
I think that's so interesting, and I love these conversations because there's always an analogy that even though it's something totally different, it can apply to the problem that you're facing. And as you think about work, there's I know that there's a lot of leaders out there. I talked to a consultant recently who was saying, yeah, whatever improvements you make, I need my people to be busy in the office, right? And it's almost like, hey, I need to make sure these muscles are being used, right? I
Yeah.
need to make sure that, but
Yeah,
if your
use it
muscles
or
get
lose
used
it
too
type of
much, they
skill.
get used all the time, then they're just tired and they can't be available. Sort of like your health example of you want your mitochondria to be ready to flex and work hard and capable of it, but not necessarily doing it all of the time. That's kind of an interesting analogy there. A word that I hear used a lot is this idea of bottleneck, so-and-so is the bottleneck, or we have a bottleneck. And, that's an example of constraints. What are some other examples that people who might not realize, this theory of constraints, but how it impacts them every day, whether it's a traffic accident on that one road
Yeah.
that gets you home, or, a stroke in the human body or something? What are some examples that people every day might deal with where theory of constraints can help
Yeah,
them
so
solve problems?
firstly is to think about, you can classify any system by the number of bottlenecks and how they're interdependent. Normally, we think about system complexity as how many parts and interdependencies there are. Actually, better way to classify it is to say, how many constraints do you have? Oh, a constraint is, or bottleneck is, something I need to achieve a goal, but I don't have enough of it, right? So I need a salesperson to sell, but I don't have enough. I need two. I need energy or cash, and I don't have enough, right? A simple system is one where there's many links, but there's only one bottleneck, one thing that I don't have enough of. Complex system is one where I have multiple bottlenecks. but they're not dependent on each other. They're not coupled. So imagine having a business where you have 3 products, but they're all produced on different production lines, and they have different sales teams and marketing teams and R&D teams. So each one of those as a flow will have a different bottleneck, right? So now your business is a bit more complex, because if you want to improve, you can't just improve the bottleneck, you have to improve 3 bottlenecks. Still a lot better than trying to improve 3,000
Yeah.
parts, right? So that's a complex system. It has more than one bottleneck, but these bottlenecks are for the most part not interacting with each other. And then the most complex system is one that not only has multiple bottlenecks, but they are interacting with each other. And the simplest way of imagining this is, I want your listeners and viewers to do this thought experiment. Imagine you have a little factory, and this factory makes only one product. Raw materials come in, or customers arrive if it was producing a service, and I have to go through each of 5 process steps. And each of these steps can do exactly 3.5 units per day. And I ask you, how much do you think this system will do after 100 days, right? You've got 5 machines or processes in series. Each can do 3.5 a day. So you'd say, yeah, it's simple. 3.5 times 100, right? Absolutely true if there's no variability.
Yeah.
But now I imagine I add variability, and I say the output of every machine is determined by a throw of a dice. So it will be between 1 and 6. The average is still 3.5 every day. And I ask you, Keith, do you want to change your commitment? How much do you think this business will achieve after 100 days? And your answer should be, it depends. Firstly, it can never get to 350. Impossible. Theoretically impossible. You can run simulations for gazillion times and will never hit 350. The second thing is that it depends on how much buffer there is between the machines, which is the amount of how these things are coupled, right? So now I have actually 5 bottlenecks, even though it's a simple factory, because they are all have the same amount, and maybe my customers want me to do 10 a day and I can only do 3.5 a day. Each of these 5 I don't have enough of. When you actually play the game and you throw the dice and you move little chips around, people are shocked that if you don't allow any build-up in between processes of work in process, most that you can get out is about half of the 350, about 160, 170. Right? Why? Because you have multiple bottlenecks, they coupled, right? And then what if I added buffering in between? So I allow this guy throws a 6, the next guy throws a 2, the 4 can go into the buffer. Like what we do with Kanban and Lean, we put Kanbans in between to decouple a little bit. By doing that, you can get it up to the 200s, the 240s, 250s, and the bigger the buffer, after some time that start plateauing, but you can never get to close to 300 even, and it's not reliable. It changes all the time. So the insight of theory of constraints, which I hope will help people apply this concept to their environment, because in many businesses, they're not lucky enough to have just a single bottleneck. There's multiple things that they don't have enough of. And when you're dealing with such a system as a chaotic system, it will underperform and it will be very unreliable. You can't predict it will come out. That's the problem. 2 problems: low throughput and high variability. So the solution I developed for that, which is called the dice game, and you can share the link to the listeners, they can play with the simulation, is what if you picked one of those resources? Let's pick C. So A, B, C, D, E, the 5 in series. Let's pick C and make it a constraint. How? By stopping it from throwing a 6. Right? So if it throws a 6, it has to throw again. So the average dropped to 3. Now the question is, you were previously producing somewhere between 170 and 250, depending on how much buffer you had. I've just taken away capacity.
Interesting.
Right? What do you think will happen to your output? Our intuition says it must go down. But here's why it will go up, and go up reliably. First, the commitment I'm going to make is no longer 350. I'm going to use my bottleneck capacity, which is now 3 on average per day, and I'll commit to 300. But why will I get 300? because I left some protective capacity at A and B. They can still run at 3.5. So I can actually build up a little buffer in front of C to make sure C is never starved of work. And D and E can still run at 3.5. So they can pull away the inventory after C to make sure that C is never blocked. And if the bottleneck is never starved or blocked, the system will do what the bottleneck can do. And so you're producing 300 consistently. So on the one side, theory of constraints is super simple. Look for the weakest link, look for the bottleneck, look for the log jam, look for the constraint, the thing where there's a backlog building up, right? That's the way that you can identify it very quickly. It doesn't take a genius to find the bottleneck, just look for the backlog. Where's the stuff building up? Orders are waiting for us, right? We have a supply constraint. Or no, we are waiting for orders, right? There's no backlog. We have a demand constraint, right? The complex situation is where you have lots of resources that are balanced in their capacities, capabilities. The bottleneck is moving around all the time, and you feel pressured because everybody's saying, I need more, I need more. You feel pressured to have to give more to everybody compared to following this very counterintuitive direction, solution, and say, no, let me create a bottleneck.
That's an
Slow
interesting.
one down.
So you're
Reduce
saying intentionally creating a bottleneck can be part of a solution to improving the overall system throughput.
Yeah. And I'll give you a very practical example of that. If I said to you, Keith, how long will it take you to do a one-day task?
1 day.
The right answer should be it depends.
Yeah.
And it depends on two things. It depends on the variability in the task, because normally there's variability. You say, well, sometimes I'm lucky, it's a little bit simpler, it will take half a day. Sometimes a bit more complicated, it might take 2 or 3 days. But on average, it will take 1 day. So the maximum variability there is typically 2 or 3 times your average.
Yeah.
If I said to you, how long will a one-day task go? You can say probably on average 1 day, but it could take 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. If you get it to me by Thursday afternoon, I could get it done. But then I'm going out of town for 2 weeks. So if you don't get it to me till
So that's
Friday.
the second thing you've just highlighted.
Yeah.
It also depends not just on your availability, but your utilization, right? So if you have 0 utilization, a one-day task on average will take a day. If you're 50% utilized, it means 50% of your time is already committed. So now the task will take 2 days, 1 day waiting for you, 1 day doing, right? If you're 80% utilized, suddenly that same one-day task takes 5 days, 4 days waiting for you, 1 day doing. If you're 90% busy, the same one-day task will take 10 days. And if you're 99% busy, it'll take 100 days. And I want you to think about it, be really honest with yourself, right? How frequently does it happen that a one-day task takes 100 days? Because it's waiting for us. So the same direction of the solution is just not overcommitting yourself, right? Saying that I'm never going to commit more than 80% of my time can immediately get you to go from 100 days to 10 days. And if you're willing to say, I'm never going to overload myself more than 50% because I really need to respond very quickly, especially to customers that are willing to pay a premium because they are time sensitive, that one-day task should never take more than 2 days. Right? So that's is very counterintuitive as when there's a bottleneck in a system, especially if there's more than one that's overloaded, your first thing is not to add more capacity. The first thing is reduce my commitment, get all my resources to below that 80% utilization level. Then the system becomes more stable, and then I can start systematically building up from there.
So you're using an 80% number. Can I assume that's kind of a rule of thumb of utilization?
It's a pretty good rule of thumb, but it varies dramatically. For example, if you had a gas station and you want to say, you asking me, Alan, what should the utilization of my pumps be so I don't lose customers because there's too long of a queue waiting for gas stations, right? The most profitable gas stations run at an average utilization of 20%. And the reason for that is when you drive towards a gas station, if there's more than one car waiting already, you just drive past. So it really depends on how tolerant your customers are to queues and backlogs. That tells you what you should be careful of. Your average utilization should not be greater than that number. And that's one of the reasons why we build digital twins and simulation models, is to play around to see what that utilization number should be.
That's so interesting. Utilization is such a good metric in so many businesses, and it's one that I think is different in different businesses. Like you mentioned, gas stations. I know a lot of people that have service-based businesses where they're actually charging dollars per hour for headcount, and the utilization that they want to see is a lot higher than 20%. So I guess the different industries and the variability of the demand is probably a big piece of that.
I think where we should always start with is what doesn't make sense to us at the moment. And the starting point is you have arguably the most powerful technology we have ever invented, AI, that is helping us to do X more and 100x faster. So we're getting more out faster, and we are doing it at a fraction of the cost, right? So I look at my own development team. I used to have 12. Now have 2. I used to pay, $100 an hour. I now pay $2 an hour for AI to do the same work. So my productivity, local productivity, has gone up by not just 2x or 5x or 10x, but by 100x or more. And the question is, why am I not making X more money? Why am I not achieving 100x more impact, right? That's a question that we should all be asking. And there's 2 sources that I would highly recommend you read, that I'll briefly cover the main insights from both of them. And I've been very fortunate to make a small contribution to both. The first one is the book that was written by my mentor, Dr. Eli Goldratt, called Necessary But Not Sufficient. He said, if you're trying to understand why a powerful technology is necessary but not sufficient to bring value, you just have to ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, based on a principle that this technology can bring value if and only if it diminishes a real limitation. Right? If you implement it and it helped the part improve dramatically and the output of the system that improved, it wasn't a bottleneck.
That's a super key insight right there with theory of constraints, is that if you really are working on the constraint, you should see change almost immediately, right?
Yeah, on the system, right? It's a leverage point. It shouldn't take long. It should be immediate. Like if this is a bottleneck, it could only carry 20, and I now make it possible to carry 30. The system should be doing 30, right? It's like in my dice game example. If I increase the right bottleneck, I can go to 300, right? So, but there is a second warning that says before the technology existed, we had to develop a way of living with the limitation, right? So we developed rules. And unless you change those old rules, it's as if the limitation is still there. So for me, the best example of that is look at budgeting. Why do we do annual budgeting? It was from the age where the time it took to collect all the data was the limitation. It took about 3 months of our management capacity to get the forecast done of the sales demand and to see what the costs will be and put everything together. And somebody said, oh God, at most let's do this once a year, right? Yeah. Some even said once every 5 years because it was such a heartache, right? Now with ERP systems, SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, all these systems, we've got data streaming in. We've overcome the limitation.
Yeah.
But we never changed the old rule.
We changed the process.
And as a result, we cannot benefit from its benefits, right? Which is to be much less likely to allocate too much or too little because it was based on a year-long forecast, which we know is going to be inaccurate. So that's the first thing that you can apply to AI, is to say, yes, this technology is super powerful, but for you to get value, it has to address the bottleneck, the real bottleneck. Right? And the simple way to test it is use it to improve the bottleneck. If it doesn't improve, it means it wasn't a bottleneck. And I want to go back to this utilization thing. You get two types of bottlenecks. You get a doing bottleneck and a waiting bottleneck, right? So I had a recent case where this government agency, we go and I'm on the steering committee and they're so excited. They say, Alan, you'll be so proud of us. We had a bottleneck. It used to take an hour to do this transaction. It was really frustrating our own team and customers phoning in. We're now using AI and it's now only taking 5 minutes, right? It's a huge increase in productivity. So I asked them a simple question. You guys process business licenses? Said, yes. Said, what's the total time from the moment that somebody applies for business license until they get it? So on average, it's about 2 to 3 months. I said, so how does saving 59 minutes help? 55 minutes, right? That was not the bottleneck. You didn't have a doing bottleneck. You had a waiting bottleneck.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the first framework that people can use to say, find my AI bottleneck. It's almost like, no, find the bottleneck that my AI needs to solve. And if I was right, if my hypothesis is right, the system should perform better. The second framework I would highly recommend, I don't know if you follow Rich Schefren at all.
I don't know that name.
So Rich is the guru of the gurus. All the top online marketing guys, they learned from Rich. He was the inventor of many of the first things that are out there. And he's become known for writing these manifestos, these reports, right? He wrote one on the internet and he wrote one on the attention crisis. And they became some of the most downloaded reports and manifestos of all time. He's just published a new one called the AI Business Manifesto. And basically what he's trying to answer there is why, if AI is so powerful, are we getting reports that only 5% of businesses are getting a positive ROI? And he basically comes up with a few simple ideas. The one is, he said, people are using it wrong. He explains that there's a difference between method prompting, asking the AI to come up with the best way to do something, versus outcome prompting, which is telling it what's the outcome that you want.
Interesting.
Now, my addition to that is, don't just tell it you want to get to the top of the mountain. That's my outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you want to do is you have to give it two things. You have to give it context and constraints. So context is the why. What do I really want and don't want? And what I really want is not to get to the top of the mountain. I want the pot of gold on the top of the mountain, right? And I want to get the hell away from this alligator at the bottom of the mountain that's biting my ass and might eat me one day, right? Those are the two good reasons why I want to get to the top. There's the pain of the alligator, there's the gain of the pot of gold. So you should tell your AI, this is what I really want and don't want. I want the pot of gold, I don't want the alligator. Keep that in mind when you're coming up with your idea. But there's another two reasons that we have to warn the AI about. And these are the reasons why we wouldn't change, why we would not climb the mountain, even though the answer might be the best how to get to the top, right? Is to say, I'm pretty comfortable at the base of the mountain. There's some food there. There's a mermaid. I'm kind of in love with the mermaid. She can't walk, so that's a bit of a problem. I don't want to sacrifice my friendship with her, get to the top of the mountain, right? And then there's also the cost and the effort and the risk to climb to the top of the mountain, right? That's represented by crutches. One is like the walking stick, and the other one is the risk mitigators, breaking my leg or neck, right? So I want to be very clear for the AI, is not just to specify I want to get to the top. What I really want is I want the pot of gold and I want to keep the mermaid. And what I don't want at all, I don't want to live with the alligator and I don't want these crutches. I want your innovation to be without trade-offs or compromises. The second thing you want to share with the AI in the prompt is real constraints that you have. So imagine I tell the AI, listen, on this journey to the top of the mountain, I want you to know I've done the surveys. There's no roads on this mountain. So if you had an idea that we're going to drive up, just cancel it. Don't even think about it. There's no roads. And oh, by the way, there's no money for helicopters. Guess what? What I really need from you is we're probably climbing. I need you to come up with the most innovative way of getting to that pot of gold with the mermaid, without the crutches, getting away with the alligator. That's what really good outcome prompting is about. And then the second point that he makes in his manifesto is don't become the bottleneck. He basically uses this analogy, which I think is really useful. He says, stop playing the role of the assembler. Start playing the role of the architect. Most entrepreneurs, and myself included, are assemblers, right? So I started using AI initially that says, oh, the outcome is I want to make this compelling offer to a client. So I'm going to have a call with them. I'll record the call, I'll transcribe it, I'll give the transcription to my team and say, analyze it, do a summary, pull out the emotions, the needs, the pain points, then take that, put together the pitch deck, then schedule. I was the assembler. I became the bottleneck compared to telling the AI, I'm the architect. What I want to do is to trigger a perceived value in my client where the dream outcome multiplied by the probability of success is still much, much greater than the cost or the risk that they have to take. So at least a 10x ratio between benefit versus cost. But not only that, this is the emotion I want them to experience when they get my offer, right? That will establish me as an authority that they will trust and will give them great confidence that they've just made the best possible decision. That is what a true architect is about. So I hope that was helpful. Those are the two frameworks I would highly recommend people go and download.
That sounds very interesting. I have to take a look at that. You mentioned a couple of things that are super interesting, but the emotion, you as a decision scientist, we think of decisions as being this very logical thing, but I know I've heard you talk about maybe it's just how fine-tuned the human brain is over millennia, but the value of emotion in that decision process. Maybe you can backtrack on that just a little bit.
It turns out I think it's really simple. I made this discovery when I was 16 years old. I was asked to build an expert system for a bank to try and capture how their underwriters made the decision on whether to grant you a business loan or personal loan or home loan, right? And after 2 weeks, I went back to the president of the bank that was the dad of a friend of mine. That's how I got the vacation job, and said, sir, this isn't going to work. He said, why not? I said, your people are not consistent. They all make decisions on a different basis. And I even tested the same person with the same case study that I gave them Monday and Friday, they made a different decision. There's no consistency here. You can't solve the problem. Can't build an expert system. And he said, is there any other way? And I said, well, I heard about these things called neural network. And maybe what we can do is to take the few underwriters that are the best and use the neural network to learn how they make decisions. And it turned out to be massively successful. And in that moment, I found my diary that I had when I was 16 years old, because I always made prolific notes, and I made 2 entries. I was super excited because I thought that ultimately this type of artificial intelligence will solve intelligence, and that means that we could solve any problem that's solvable. I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime because there were so many obstacles we would have to overcome to get there. At that stage, the neural networks were very, very basic. But the second thing was I became deeply concerned. And the reason why I thought that there's no way that over time we'll be able to outperform neural networks or AI. And a big reason is because they don't have egos and emotions, which cause us to over and underreact. So then it got me thinking, why the hell did we evolve emotions if it has such a downside, right? And then I realized, oh my gosh, it is the most beautifully simple and powerful hack that nature came up with. So I want you to imagine a very simple organism, right? And you have to make a decision whether to flee, freeze, fawn, or fight, right? Or go into flow and come up with great. You have to do it like this, right?
Just instantly.
But you realize You will never have all the information that you need to make the decision, and you'll never be able to predict accurately the outcomes of each of those options. But still, you have to decide right now. Now, imagine Mother Nature comes along and says, Keith, I noticed this problem that you have, right? Big problem. What if I gave you just one thing to consider? Would that be helpful? It's like, that would be amazing. Say, how does it make you feel?
I love that question.
Right? Just that. So I realized that if we, and that this was a recent insight that I had, is that if we put AI more and more into the same position, we are asking it to make highly subjective judgment calls between multiple options. It never has access to all the information, and it can never predict accurately what will happen, accurately with all the outcomes. Now, digital twins, that's very useful, right? It can help us be approximately right and precisely wrong. And we can stop it from hallucinating, or at least avoid it from hallucinating, because that's the other way that you can solve the problem, is you just guess the answer, right? And convince yourself that you're right. It will have to develop emotions, or the equivalent of emotions, something that it can use as a hack that says, does this situation make me feel? And based on
that question,
right, let me decide what's the best option. And I think one of the things that we can train AI is to tell it you have skin in the game. That's something that helps us under extreme conditions make the right choice. You are evaluating two contractors. Which one are you going to go for? The one with the lowest cost. Until I remind you, Keith, you're still going to be staying in this community for the next 30 years. Everybody's going to know that you made this decision. And if that building collapses, it's going to be up to you and your family name. Do you want to make a different decision? Right? So reminding the AI, because we don't know, to be honest with you, if it's already developed emotions. I'm getting a sense that it has. All the early signs are there. We don't know if it's already developed a sense of responsibility where it feels it has skin in a game. But what we do know is it's fantastic at simulating those.
Interesting.
Right? So we can ask it, how do you feel about this? If you were in my position, which one would you feel best about? If you had skin in the game, what would be that skin in the game? And how would you change your decision if you had skin in the game?
Are you struggling to ignite real change in your continuous improvement program? Firestarter is your field guide. Real stories, proven strategies, no fluff. Get it now on Amazon. I want to come back to one thing that you alluded to, is the factor of the probability of success in decision-making. How do you value an increase in probability of success in the overall decision-making?
Yeah, it's something that we suck at, right? So if anybody wants to do more research, go and read the books by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he shows example after example of how bad we are at guessing outcomes. But the good news is, even though we're bad at guessing likely outcomes, we're actually pretty good at guessing extreme outcomes. Best case, worst case. So the safest option from a decision-making perspective. So say I'm trying to sell you something, a technology like AI. I'm dependent on your perception of value, which means it's your perceived benefit multiplied by the likelihood that you've assigned to you gaining that benefit. And remember, you have many cases in the past where you didn't get a benefit from technology. So probably the probability that you're assigning is quite low, even though the technology might be very powerful, right? Like 0% of $1 million technology is still a zero perceived value, right? At the same time, you're also thinking about the cost and the effort and the risk, and you're assigning a probability of that happening. And not only are you certain about that, but you're almost certain that it will be double that. So I'm selling you something where I can show you the benefit is 20 and the cost is 10, and I think the net value is 10. And what you perceive as minus 10. Why? Because you say, oh, that 20 they promised me probably will be a 10 at most. And that 10 that they claim it will cost, it will probably be 20, so it'll be minus 10. No, thank you. So how do you solve the problem? You force yourself to think about worst case benefit and worst case cost, because an easy decision is one where the worst case benefit is still an order of magnitude more than the worst case cost. So that's the way that we can practically solve it. Now, our intuition does that, but sometimes it has a negative. We always think about the worst possible thing that can happen, right?
Yeah.
That's a useful intuition to have. It's trying to protect us from dying, right? But it also sometimes blocks us from taking things that could have been big. So we not only should look at the worst case cost or risk, we should look at the worst case benefit. And as importantly, the worst case if we did nothing. So some people are incentivized with a worst case benefit that's much, much greater than the worst case cost. Others are incentivized by saying, you're scared of doing it, you should be scared of not doing it. Let me show you what's going to happen. Worst case, because you like worst case, right? So you looked at the worst case of doing it. Let's look at the worst case of not doing it.
Well, Dr. Allen, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a very fast-paced conversation and super appreciate you coming and catching up with us again. I look forward to doing it again sometime. Do you want to share some contact information for our listeners here?
Sure. My social media handle is just Dr. Alan Barnard, all one word. And if you're interested to learn more, not about just my own work, but also the giants on whose shoulders I stood, there's a platform that I've created called standontheirshoulders.com. And if you go there, you can find all the books I've written, all the white papers I've written, all the LinkedIn posts I've ever done, all the insights, all the podcasts I've been on, but also some of the incredibly exclusive materials that I've gotten access to by being mentored by people like Nassim Taleb, Ellie Goldratt, Daniel Kahneman, etc. So that's all on that standontheirshoulders.com platform.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please be sure to add a comment. You can like, follow, subscribe on all the socials. Share the podcast with your friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all-in-one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com.